I think it will, once people are up there, it'll focus for like white balance and that. It's gonna be dark, unfortunately. Okay.
Jordan is like total darkness.
And they will yeah, that improves it.
Hey, Russell.
You were dying, right? Yeah, you're up. All right, I think it is the top of the hour, so we will get started. My name is Aaron Beahm. I'm the chair of the department, and I also teach sculpture here at Thesis College. It was my privilege this year to work with our senior Thesis students. This is our second round of lectures and subsequent gallery reception over in JDAC after the lectures are over. We're super lucky, I feel like, of where things are at right now. Last year we had to do a virtual lectures and a virtual exhibitions, and I know that those students, in a lot of ways, felt like they missed out on something. And the thesis process is rigorous, it's long, it's trying, and stressful, and so, you know, this is a really great opportunity for us to celebrate the hard work of these students, and in a way that we're used to doing. And so, please ask you at this time to turn off your cell phone, set it to vibrate or silent, or just completely off. Typically, in these types of lectures, we do a Q&A at the end. Last time, a few weeks ago, we did some individual Q&A in between. This group of students have elected to only do individual questions in between lectures. And then at the end, at the reception, offer any group group questions or additional conversation and questions. So we'll have about 7 minutes in between each lecture for individual questions. And then we invite you over to JDAS for the gallery reception and to view the work which the students will be talking about today. So thank you all for being here again, and let's give this group a warm round of applause. Their names are on the board, they're up on the screen, and but to put faces to those names in order of presentation, Brady Achtemeier, Michael Beahm, Connor Goodwin, Jordan Ismaiel, and McKenna Lamoree. So, yeah, without further ado, we'll get started.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so glad you all made it. For my project, I created a series of animations, drawings, and sculptures. I'm unaware that other people don't experience it too. I didn't know that I had this form of synesthesia until I was 19 years old. I assumed everybody else's experiences were the same. Before I get too much into this, I think it's important to clarify two distinct different types of synesthesia, associative and projective. An associative synesthete would just associate things with a stimulation. So they would believe that the letter A is a blue color, or be reminded of pudding every time they heard the national anthem. But that wouldn't necessarily mean that they're actually experiencing those things. A projective synesthete literally experiences their associations. They would believe that they would literally see the letter A as blue on the page, just as I literally feel forms moving throughout my body. When I discovered that this was different than other people's experience, I immediately turned to my sketchbook, but discovered that these forms are very difficult to materialize. I often describe them as water or steam moving inside of me. I am filled with the water or steam, and there is movement, typically from my chest out my mouth. But how does one capture vapors? How does one draw steam? That's what I felt I was tasked with. I became inspired by Mccracken's work. She is a beautiful oil painter who has chromesthesia, or the synesthesia that causes people to see music. I really admire her work for its beauty and for its boldness. To be open about the neurological condition that she has made me feel as though I could be also, and share these experiences with others. When my senior thesis rolled around, there was nothing else I wanted to do, nothing else I felt as passionate about, and nothing that felt this innate. As I discussed previously, I had to come up with a set of symbols to represent the movement that I felt. This echoes the work of Helma af Klint. By some estimates, she predates Kandinsky in abstraction. But nobody knew about her until 20 years after her death, because that's only when her work was revealed for her wishes. She was an exceptional artist who essentially would conduct seances to receive commissions. This is where her inspiration came from. She and a like-minded group of women would conduct seances and receive commissions from the spirits. And one of her greatest commissions was to describe the spirit of the universe. This painting is a part of that series. In order to describe the spirit of the universe, a very daunting task that took up most of her life's work, she turned to symbols. Colors became genders, spirals represented life. She was a forward thinker, and I was very inspired by her work. I began to realize that drawings and paintings were not the only way I should communicate these forms, but that I should also turn to animation, because they're living, moving things. It did not take me long to make this realization. Here's one of my very first animations. As you can see, it's very rough. This was a sketch. This was never meant to be something that would really be seen. But for me, it was monumental because it just was helping me get these emotions on paper. It helped me get them out. I explored the idea of portraying the emotions in songs for a while, and I also explored the idea of adding color to the movement. While the colors seemed helpful at first because it could help communicate exactly what emotion was which, for instance, yellow, happy, red, romance, that sort of thing, I realized that firstly it was very limited by our culture. Not all cultures share the same color associations. And I also realized that it just wasn't accurate to my experience because they don't have color. I also, when I was painting songs, would smash all of the emotions together. This wasn't great because it also wasn't very true to my experience. I don't experience all of these at once. They're each individually felt throughout the timeline of the song. I also turned to three main ways of communicating these emotions. So here in this drawing, I used all three. This is made of charcoal and Sharpie. And in this Sharpie here with the spikes, that's the entirety of an emotion. That's the entirety of the emotion, the entirety of the form. This wavy form up here, that's just the point of most pressure. I multiplied it to make it appear as though it was moving across the page. This swirl right here represents the movement of the emotion, without it in its entirety, without its shape. Not long after I decided to move away from songs, I began to explore sculpture. They were good, but they still weren't there yet. I really enjoyed it, but it still wasn't a finished product. They didn't feel done. They felt like sketches. So the first two that you see here included a very hefty base. That would later have to go because it distracted from the form. And the shiny acrylic paint was also distracting. As I remember that all of these forms were going together. So when I moved to cardboard, I decided to try and sketch myself on there for no good reason, and to portray the entirety of the forms. This was a step in the right direction, to portray the entirety of the forms. It took me a while to solidify how I would depict the forms, though. This is about as literal as I could possibly be. It looks to something to me as though it was out of a science textbook about synesthesia. It really depicts my form. It really helps show maybe what I'm feeling, but it still isn't quite there yet because it's too literal. It's just shoving it in your face. I had a similar experiment with animation. Again, pretty nice, but very, very obvious. Here's a couple more of my experiments. This one, however, was a step in the right direction. Finally, I landed on a way of animating that I felt was accurate. It showed the entirety of the form and its movement, sort of a combo of the two. I also played around with the idea of a vessel, something to contain the emotions to represent my body. But this was misleading. Many people look at that and go, oh, that's the female figure, an exaggerated version of that, when that is not the case. It's actually supposed to represent my chest, stomach, mouth, and throat. So just moving up like this. And that was very misleading. I experimented also with this vessel in my sculptures, and this was helpful, again, to help show that it was contained within something, but not entirely necessary. And I felt as though it almost, even though I used the thinnest wire and wrapped it around it in a way that wouldn't obscure the object, I still felt that it was a distraction. Speaking about the bases, as I mentioned earlier, the bases were not very successful. They simply held up the sculptures, and they were clunky, and they were obvious, and they did not do what I really wanted them to be doing. So I looked into Cy Twombly's work. Cy Twombly was influenced by the Dada and Surrealism movements. He's a multimedia artist, and I focused heavily on his sculptures. He had a way of incorporating the base into the sculpture to the point where it no longer felt like a base. Because at no point would I point at this and go, that's a base. I would look at that and go, that's a part of the sculpture. That is it within the sculpture. My first attempts were mostly successful, but they didn't incorporate the base well. Then I had a breakthrough. I decided that I would project my animations onto people so that they could come as close as possible to experience what I experience on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, pretty much constantly. And I found that idea was a really good direction, and so I went with it. But because the people now became the vessel was no longer necessary, and it disappeared from my animations. It also disappeared from my sculpture. My animations became more complex as I became better at animating and was able to focus on clearly defining the forms. Something that I struggle to communicate is that these forms are not clearly formed. They're vague, they're fleeting. To create them in a way that everybody else can capture is extremely difficult. But I feel as though with this project I have succeeded with that. As my symbology became better, so did my drawings. They became clearer. My sculptures also became more developed and incorporated the base better. I strayed from the life-size sculpture. So originally my sculptures were about this tall, supposed to be about the size from my chest, about my mouth, that sort of thing. But I decided to move away from that and communicate the enormity of the emotions. To communicate, make size actually mean something. So you can see in the middle of that song, it hit the middle emotion there hits a lot differently than the small beings on the side. Towards the end of my work, I also discovered the answer to the question, where do the forms come from? Now, obviously it's a neurological thing. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is how do they materialize inside me? How do they go from not existing to existing? Because it seemed like the edges were blurred there, and I didn't really understand how to nail that down. And this was a question I was constantly asked by my professors in order to communicate this. When I came to the realization that all emotions are interconnected. No emotion is isolated, truly. Each emotion is always feeding off of the last. And I think a good way to explain this is if you stub your toe on a great day, or if you stub your toe when you're having a really bad day. The emotions you were feeling before that are going to impact how you react. So you're having a great day, you stub your toe. Ow, that hurts. But I'll probably move on, and it's not going to ruin my day. I'm already having a bad day, and I stub my toe. Ow, that was absolutely awful. My day is ruined. Everything is horrible. Ultimately, emotions do the same thing. So I attempt to connect these emotions and figure out what connects one emotion to what. This is often used in counseling and psychology I later learned. So for this drawing, to communicate this, the loop of emotion, the interconnectedness of emotion, this form came from this form, and that's why this form is faded in the background. This form is what the drawing is truly of, but it cannot exist without the previous one before it. Ultimately, the goal of my art is to help others explore another way of feeling. To step into my shoes and feel differently. Thank you for being here today. Does anyone have any questions?
I'm wondering how you decided on black as the color you would use to represent the feelings of the sculpture.
A lot of my decisions are spontaneous and come from my gut. But that particular decision came from the idea that these happen in the dark. They happen within my body. It wouldn't make sense to make them any other color to me. Thank you.
Is your synesthesia ever a pleasant experience?
Yes, sometimes it makes me want to cry. It's so beautiful. Especially when I'm singing or when I'm listening to music. When I was younger, I thought it was my soul moving inside of me. As ridiculous as that seems now, it's what it felt like.
And is it sometimes a very unpleasant experience?
Yes, it can be. Heartbreak is bad for 2 reasons.
Has it changed at all over time, like as you've been working on this project? Has your experience of the synesthesia changed at all?
I
Like,
think-
becoming more familiar with it now?
I've become more aware of it, and it's also become useful because sometimes you don't really know how you're feeling, but I can't ever deny that. It's constantly appearing there. And when I started this project, I didn't know what a lot of the different forms correlated to, but now I know what almost every single form correlates to, be it dread or anger or frustration. I know what the form correlates to. I think we have a question. Thank you. Good question over there.
You said you experience it daily, hourly. Are you experiencing it right now?
Yes. I'm a little bit nervous.
Could you repeat that?
She said that I experience it daily, hourly. She asked if I was experiencing it right now, and the answer is yes. Happy but anxious. I think another thing I didn't touch on as much too is that I chose to remain ambiguous so that each people could draw their own conclusions on the work. I think that's also important to include.
Do you have a favorite one that you depicted here? Do you think was the most accurate?
Yeah, a lot of my favorites end up being the ones that are the most accurate, as he said. I think this is my favorite of all of my drawings. First of all, I had a ton of fun making it, and I also feel as though it's one of the most accurate drawings, accurate portrayals of what I'm feeling. Especially this emotion is extremely difficult to materialize.
Be willing to share the emotion?
I would gladly share it afterwards, but yeah, because I know that some people want to draw their own conclusions first and then come to it, I'll happily tell you later.
You are a double major
Yep.
in studio digital art and then also digital design and development.
Correct.
How has your other major, or has it, influenced how you approach this work?
So I'm also a graphic design emphasis in another major. And ultimately I found that it just incorporated me in small things. It didn't really have a giant impact as maybe you could see, but maybe the small things will add up to a small and brighter impact. For instance, with this drawing, I didn't stray away from using panels of paper because I felt as though it was a grid, and a grid was something I was trained to use. And so that was very helpful. I also enjoyed the stark contrast, the very graphic difference between black and white. I think that came from my graphic design background as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Brady.
Thank you guys.
All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Oh, thanks. Thought I was in for a tough crowd. Thank you all again for being here. I would like to make a quick note, because there are 5 of us presenting today. After 3 of us go, we're going to take a little short break so we can all stand up, get a drink, use the restroom, recollect our thoughts, and then we'll finish up with the last 2. So don't worry about like having to hold it if you go to the bathroom. We've left time for that. My name is Beahm, and today I'm sharing with you my body of work that I'm calling Ports of Recall. I'd like to start by answering the question that I know all of you are wondering. What does the bottom half of your face look like? There you go. All right, so to fully understand some of my work, I think it's important that I start with some background information and some context. In academia, I'm what is often referred to as a non-traditional student. This is a very polite way of saying that I'm a little bit older than the other artists presenting today. So my story also might be a little bit longer. So I'd like to start in about the 1st grade. Seriously, I'm starting in 1st grade. When I was young, when I was a kid, I didn't like to draw. I hated coloring, and because of that, I hated what I thought was just art in general. I pretty much swore it off. In fact, when I was young, coloring was such a thing that I despised. It was sometimes used as a threat to shape up. It was sort of one of those, like Beahm, I will make you sit down and color, and then I would knock it off. Now, I think that this was for a couple reasons that I didn't like coloring. One was that I probably would have just would rather be outside playing in the mud. The other is that I didn't really like being restricted or bound by the borders of a coloring page. That being said, here's one of my freehand illustrations from 2nd grade. When I was in 3rd grade, I had an art teacher tell me that I sucked at art. A 3rd grade art teacher. Who does that? So I wasn't exactly set up for success, and I despised art all through school until I was 17. And when I was 17, I was a junior in high school. That's when I first stepped foot into the Hastings College glass blowing studio. If there are any beginners here, look at this form and don't copy it at all. But this is the turning point. This is when I understood that art was so much more than drawing, and it was so much more than painting, and it was definitely not coloring. Art could be a lot of things. And I attribute this to my friend and former professor, Tom Krieger, who really fostered a passion and built a community in that glass studio that was unlike anything I'd ever seen. So I think that a lot of my passion for the material and my excitement for glass came from that, and it came from Tom, and it came from the other people in that glass studio who were so excited to be there every single day. So when I was 18, I was a senior in high school, I was still hanging around in the glass studio. Tom told me about this program called the Blow Glass at Sea program. It was a glass blowing partnership between the Corning Museum of Glass in Corning, New York, and Celebrity Cruise Lines. Basically, they put glass studios on cruise ships, sent glass blowers on them, and they traveled around the world doing glass making demonstrations. This was obviously a very enticing gig because this is getting to do my favorite thing in the world, and it's traveling for free, and it's literally breaking down those borders, much like on a coloring page. So this became my goal, this became my dream. This is from my high school yearbook. We were all asked to write down what we wanted to be when we grow up, and for ease, I wrote pirate. But I still didn't really like drawing, so I think I had my sister draw that for me. But this was my goal. So I graduated from high school. My dad was working at Central Community College, and I went there, got an associate's degree in graphic design, and I was blowing glass the entire time. When I graduated from there, I moved to Corning, New York, to get my foot in the door at the museum, and I started doing the Make Your Own Blow Glass program. So I was helping visitors to the museum blow glass, make little ornaments, flowers, trinkets, things like that. And at the end of the summer, I auditioned to go blow glass at sea. I was 19 years old. I'd been blowing glass 2 years, and they were very polite to me. They said, look, you didn't do a bad job. You didn't do a great job, but you're very young, you're very inexperienced, and if this is something you're serious about, keep working, keep sending us images, and maybe one day this is something that you can do. So to make that long story short, after about 4 more years of blowing glass, I finally got to go work on the Celebrity Eclipse in the Baltic Sea, traveling around blowing glass. So this is the ship. The first time I saw this, by the way, I'd never been on a cruise. I rolled up to the ship and went, oh my God, what have I done? So here's the glass studio on the top deck of a cruise ship, sailing through the fjords of Norway, the archipelago of Sweden, and this is a whole bunch of people watching me do the one thing that I've been trying to do for 6 years. And this is what it looks like to be an evening sheet pirate. Mission accomplished. So this was great. I did this for about 2 years, 3 contracts, 9 months, over 30 countries. And it all ended. The museum and the cruise line ended their partnership after 10 years, which is a really long time in the cruise industry. But I was fortunate because I got to come back to Hastings. The Jackson Dinsdale Art Center was recently opened, and we had this new crazy idea. This is Tom again, I have to thank him for this, for a mobile glassblowing studio. So I took this mobile glassblowing studio on the road, traveling all around the region, doing glassmaking demonstrations for high school students, sharing my passion, sharing Hastings College. And again, that all ended in March of last year with COVID. I suddenly couldn't go to the 20 schools that I had booked. But luckily I had been taking classes here, and I was able to throw myself fully into this studio art degree. So when we got to Thesis, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do or what I wanted to make, but I'd been relying on basically 10 years of glassmaking experience to make vessels and functional work. So I thought, I will make vessels and functional work. In fact, I'm going to make 366 cups. I will call it 365 cups. There will be one for every day of the year, including leap year. And I will present them all on a wall. And I made a pretty good case for it, and it seemed like the general consensus was kind of like, well, I guess, if you want. But there were 2 problems. One problem was that glassblowing is a team sport, and to make all of these cups, I would need someone else to assist me. And that is a huge time investment to ask of someone. The other problem was that Aaron hated this idea. He will deny it, but he hated it. But he hated it for a good reason. He wanted me to push myself conceptually. He thought that I could do more and I could do something greater. So I was thinking about what I could make and what parts of my life would be important and what could I reflect on. So I thought about my obsession with boats, of course, from traveling and the experiences that I've had on the ship. But I also began thinking about some of my earlier experiences on the water. This is from the same year, actually, as that first butterfly drawing. It's the butterfly effect, you guys. So this was a Boy Scout trip. It was a family trip canoeing the Niobrara. We've done this many times. I've gone on canoeing trips with my family many times. And I also, when I graduated from high school, bought a kayak with my graduation money. So I had all of this time and all of this investment in just spending time on the water and using the kayak as sort of my catharsis or meditation. Now, when I'm always blowing glass, whether it's in front of a bunch of people on a cruise ship or some high school kids, I often tell them that we're only limited by our imagination. We can really make anything we want. And we see this a lot in flame working of glass, using a small torch. I have a friend that makes little ramen noodle bowls. It's much more common to make things that you just really enjoy and are really passionate about. And I wanted to do that in the hot shop, in the glass studio, doing furnace work. So I was thinking about the kayak, And one of my experiences, one of my times in Corning, I went through the gallery and I found this piece. It's from a Finnish glass factory, and it's a kayak. And I thought, this is awesome. I can make my own kayak. I can put my own spin on this. When I would also walk through the gallery, I'd see this body of work called Endeavor by Leno, Talia, Pietro. He's one of the greatest glass blowers in the world. He's 86 years old. He's been blowing glass for over 70 years. I think he started when he was 11. And he's still pushing the boundaries of the glass world. He's still innovating, and a lot of people in the glass world still look up to him, including myself. Now, these are based in gondolas of Venice. He also said that these were inspired by the canoes of the Amazon. But they're incredibly beautiful, and on closer inspection of detail, some of these have, first of all, a lot of really traditional Italian techniques in the color application, but as well as surface decoration. So I hope that you can see, if you look closely, some of the texture and some of the designs that were cut and carved into the glass. So I figured I'd take a go at it. This is my first attempt at a kayak. Blue, like my own. You can't tell, but there's a hole in the backside of this kayak, because that's what we do when we take very careful photos. We can just hide things. So this is my first attempt. It wasn't really great, but it gave me an idea of how to proceed and how I could improve upon the method and the process. So this was the second one that I made. This one's yellow, like my sister's kayak. She's the one that goes with me most often. Now you'll also notice that this has some cutting and some carving on the surface as well. I didn't do this. I made this in Corning, and one of my friends, Anna, was there. She was an incredible glass cutter. She trained at a school in Austria. So here she is on the right cutting that canoe, or cutting that kayak, and you can see the scale. And then on the left, you can see her more traditional work that she typically does. Here's some more of her work that she typically does. Now, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do anything like this. Thinking about, progressing through this body of work, how would I make this my own? So I started looking to the Farrow brothers, Pietro and Riccardo. There are some glass cutters that took over their father's glass cutting business, and they've been cutting glass for tens of thousands of hours, and they sort of color outside the lines in their cold working techniques. They do cold working for Leno, they do cold working for a lot of the greatest glass artists, but in their own work, they apply these techniques in different ways to make these really beautiful, bright, vibrant, loud, contemporary pieces. So I was really inspired by this, thinking about how I could start doing my own cutting and grinding on surface work. So this is my first attempt. And while I liked the top section, I wasn't super keen on the bottom. And this was the second one. And I was also realizing that, for one, this wasn't really evoking what I wanted to evoke. It wasn't sort of capturing what I had thought it would capture. So I also thought about how I hadn't been cold working glass for probably even tens of hours, and I wasn't going to be able to achieve what some of these other artists were achieving. So I needed to change my direction a little bit. So I started making these cups, and I would cut and carve through the layers of glass, thinking about different places that I've been and using those places as my inspiration. Thinking about all of the experiences that I've had, all of the different cultures that I was able to see, and removing my initial bias, removing my perceptions, and thinking about all of the things that I didn't know, all of the things that I was able to learn, and all of the things that I still have to learn. So cutting through these layers, revealing something underneath, revealing new information. So that looks a lot like this. It's not glamorous, and it takes a long time, but it's a lot less surface area to cold work than one of those entire kayaks. So this is a time lapse of probably over about an hour. I wish it went this fast. You get it. So the result of that maybe. There we go. So the result of that, this is the one I was working on. I removed some of the surface before cold working in these actual designs. Again, inspired by some of the places that I've been. So once I have all of these cups created, I start to warm them back up, and then I stuff more glass inside of the cups. And this is sort of one of those do or die moments. You only have one shot to get the glass inside of the cup perfectly so that you can use that cup, which means that if you mess up, all of your work, cold working, is gone. Luckily, the one we videoed was a successful one. There we go. So after stuffing that cup, it becomes homogeneous with that color underneath, and then we can begin changing and inflating the form. So the glass is inflated, and then it's also squished, which is, in fact, a technical term. So using these cork paddles to squish and flatten the glass to begin giving me my surface area that I want it to work on. The cork that's burning is one of the greatest smells that exists in the glass studio. Once the glass is squished, then I begin stretching it. So I stretch each half on its own. So this is the first half stretching. You can see the difference in heat where it's glowing bright orange. That's the part that I'm trying to change. And then I stretch the other half. So you can see where that first half has been stretched, and now the other half is beginning to stretch as well. So this is a really organic process while this stretches, which means that all of those forms, all of those designs really start to stretch and change and become a bit more organic as well. So just some more process shots. This is another one you can see in the gallery. This is that same yellow one that I was cold working. See how all of this begins to change and distort. So as I'm thinking about the way that the designs are changing and distorting, I'm also thinking about memory. It was pointed out to me that a lot of these places that I'm reflecting on are some of my memories. And luckily at the time, I was taking an introduction to psychology class, so I was a memory expert. And I was learning that as we recall a memory, we're not really recalling the actual event. Instead, we're more recalling the last time we remembered that event. What begins to happen is we begin imparting additional information on that memory, oftentimes from the most recent time we recalled it. Everybody follow that? It's a little tricky. So we are imparting all this information, which means that our memories are distorting and they're changing also with time. So this became a much more natural way for me to show some of that change, some of that distortion, and be thinking about what these vessels are. So these are some up-close images of some of that surface imagery. And this is some work by Philip Baldwin and Monica Goodwin. Now, I first started looking at their work, thinking about the surface designs on vessels and how I could incorporate some of those cold working techniques. What I didn't realize was that these bodies of work, these boats that they've created, are also about memory. So they're using these individual pieces inside of the boats as metaphors for different experiences, thinking about accruing these memories and keeping them as relics. So I was also thinking about, what does that mean as my boats becoming a relic? What does that mean as far as capturing a moment in time and encapsulating that moment? Which was also fortunate, because these series by Nancy Rubens, these huge sculptures of canoes, initially they start out, oftentimes her work is about abundance of material and abundance of goods, but when she's constructing these, they become more about capturing that moment and saving that moment in time. She's not sketching these in advance, she's just kind of assembling it and figuring out where the next one can go and freezing that moment in time. And I think about my kayaks being these vessels to freeze a moment in time. The change has happened, the distortion has happened, and now I'm left with this beautiful relic, this beautiful memory with all of this surface design. So this is an image of a glacier in Alaska next to the boat. This yellow one that you've been seeing throughout the presentation, the imagery is taken off of tile work from the facades of the tiles in Lisbon, Portugal. This is just the beautiful landscape and stunning scenery of Norway. And I also use this as an opportunity to think about preservation of both memory and place. I was fortunate enough to get to scuba dive on the Great Barrier Reef, which was one of the most incredible experiences that I'll never forget. But I also worry, of course, about that fragile and delicate ecosystem. So this one has no cold working. This is just thinking about how can we preserve this place? How can we preserve our memories? So there are still colors underneath the blue, there are still colors inside of this, but you don't really get to see any of it. And this is me, lying on the ground under my cardboard mock-ups of the entire gallery. I didn't want to put a picture of the entire space because I wanted you to all have that experience of walking in and seeing them all for yourselves, and have that be a little more impactful. But this was sort of the almost end point with a little bit of relief. And before I move on, I do also have to say a couple of thank yous. Of course, first my family for always encouraging me, your unwavering support in wanting to do the crazy thing, chasing this weird dream of blowing glass on a cruise ship, for coming to the glass studio with me on holidays to make things, to make Christmas ornaments so I could buy more glass color. I have to thank Tom for giving me the chance for all of the many opportunities that I've had. None of this would have ever happened without him letting me, 17-year-old kid, little pyromaniac, hang out in the glass studio. I have to thank Brian Porter, the glass professor, for all of his help in making all of these. I could not have done that without him. Very happy that he's in Hastings now. Avery, thanks for running doors for me all the time. Christian, Ben, anyone else in the glass studio that have helped out, which has been several people. I appreciate it so much. The other faculty for all of your conversations and critiques. And then, of course, my friends who've listened to me talk about glass for 10 years and have, gone to play pool without me, even though I've been working on these things. Yeah, thank you all so much. The question round, let's go. Yes, Tom.
As you showed us, and what I see from my experience, there's a lot of artists that use boats. What is the draw of the boat as a metaphor?
I think the draw of the boat as a metaphor is the journey. You think about it as a vessel for, actual travel, but also as a vessel for experience. So that's the way I look at it. And, obviously it's a pretty direct parallel between the work that I'm making and my experiences, but I think that that's not exactly necessary. I think that you can just use that as a way to add. Yeah.
How many injuries are involved?
How many injuries? Whew. Well, I've been blowing glass about 10 years. I was pretty good numbers. Yeah. The first week in the glass studio is pretty much safety. How to, burn me in some way. But if you're a fast learner, Yeah. Yeah, so the world is a big, big place. And when you have all these experiences, one of the things that I found was that I would come back to Hastings and I was very different. I had learned so much. I had seen so much. I had experienced so much. And all my friends were like, yeah, dude, nothing's different. You were gone 3 months, it's the same here. Which is kind of frustrating sometimes because you've had these experiences and no one can relate to them when you come back home. So I was choosing places that were impactful to me as far as my worldviews back some of those lessons. So a lot of it was just, yeah, places. Or impacted my views so significantly. I think some of it's just grace, some of it's optimism, some of it's pessimism. Going to some of the most developed nations that have incredible education and healthcare systems and constantly rank in the top levels for nationwide happiness, and being in places where schools don't have windows, you kind of get a spectrum. And
maybe fostering that with the next generation of glass blowers, and or just
seeing other people excited about glass and art in general, and sharing that information with others. So for me, I think that, but as far as work goes, yeah, this is 100% the most meaningful to me. It's also the most cohesive body of work that I've ever produced. So yeah, it's number 2 after that fireplace for sure. Yeah. Great. That's probably, should we wrap it up, move on? I don't know if it's on or any last comments. You got about a minute. Yes.
So you spoke quite a bit about like all of your memories, right? Early on they were with family, and later on they're on a cruise ship. So you're constantly surrounded with people, yet you chose a kayak, which is a single-person vessel. Can you talk to me more about why you chose a kayak?
Yeah, I chose it for the exact reason that you said. It's a single-person vessel, so a lot of this was my own reflection about my own growth and my own changes. So from all of those experiences that I've had, the way that my perceptions had changed, I can't project that on anyone else. And as far as the cruise ship goes, one of the greatest parts about it was meeting and making friends from all over the world, and getting to sit down in the crew bar and drink dollar beers and learn about where they're from and learn about their culture. But again, when you come back, there's not really a great way to express that to other people. So that's just something that you kind of sit with and you have, and it's for you. And you use that information for your own growth and your own development. And I felt that the single person vessel was the most appropriate for that, not only because of my experiences, but for the individual growth. Yeah.
What is one thing you learned through this process of personal reflection during the project?
One thing that I've learned about myself through this process of self-reflection. I've learned mostly that I don't give myself enough credit for my potential or my capacity as an artist. I think that part of wanting to make cups was that I'd never really felt like an artist. I mean, I've made so many pieces of glass, but I'd never really produced a huge body of work. And I think that making cups was a little bit of like, you know, an easy out of like not having to really push myself as an artist. And I think that having to produce this body of work and having to make something greater than a functional object was probably like the greatest impact of this experience. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here, even though you've already been thanked twice, and we'll probably be thanked twice again before we leave here. Before I really get into it, I want to talk a little bit about the show title and how I came up with it, because I came to it from a few different reasons. The first being that art making has always been something pleasurable for me, and that is pretty surface level, but it's also very important. In a way, it was how I countered like the blandness of everyday life and its duties, whether that be like waking up and going to a class I didn't have any interest in, or going to work on a day I just wasn't feeling it. It was an escape for me. The second reason is that the imagery of dessert came up quite a bit in some of my larger, more skillful works that I started out with in this thesis process. Sweets became integral to this body of work. So combining these two words, sweet and escape, I quickly scribbled the word sweetscape in my sketchbook. And I didn't have too much confidence in this term, and I wasn't thinking about it too much for a while until I came to the show itself, which is my last reason. When you see the show, if you haven't already, I'm creating sort of isolated landscapes by combining vessels and thousands of hydrolics, and I'll explain that a bit more later. But when we really get down to it, my work explores the human experience when dealing with issues of self-control, indulgence, and gratification. And to illustrate this, I use multiplicity of an object as a device and dessert as a sort of muse. And to explain some of these ideas, I use other ideas of hedonism as well as concepts of the visceral response and repetition. And these are used to explain my discoveries relating to indulgence and gratification. I'll start with my foundations and how I began this process, and then I'll examine the middle ground of my work, what I thought it was about, but I still didn't know too much. And pretty early on, I decided to make work and then let the purpose reveal itself to me as it worked. And then finally, I will take you through my final thoughts, where I really reached some clarity on what my work was about. Here are just some pictures of some early work. My high school was pretty poor. I never had access to ceramics, but I'd always just been fascinated with the medium. When I came to college and started taking ceramics classes, I was finally introduced to this whole new world of possibilities to explore within that medium. Clay is really versatile, so I kind of just got lost in this new spectrum I was engaging in. As I was becoming more fluent and skilled with the medium, I was encouraged to appropriate work from already established artists to help find my own direction, while also increasing skill. And this brought me to the work of Stephen Hill. He is a functional or sculptural functional potter, and he's from Missouri. He works in just porcelain, and I really responded to his use of slip, which is a watered down form of clay, and you use it for making joints, or when you're hand building, or just creating texture in either hand building or throwing. The pot on the right is in process, and that demonstrates this as well as I can show you for now. Here's just a picture of some slip I had. It's basically fancy mud. These two pieces are a result of this appropriation, and I was really focusing on color, texture, and form. And this is when I really started working more conceptual than formal. After working in ceramics for a couple of years at this point, I knew I really enjoyed the process of throwing. I found it pretty meditative, and the tactility of the medium was really calming to me. I originally thought that this was going to be a large factor of my thesis, but this quickly just became an innate way of how it worked. And this isn't to lessen that factor, the meditative quality of it, but it became an explanation of why I fell in love with the medium. It provides a break from chores of everyday life. And this passion was ignited because it was different from what we all experienced. I'll touch on that idea in my personal significance with it a little bit later. So this realization also made me realize that there wasn't else much to explore there, and it didn't really answer the question of how I made my aesthetic decisions. And it also didn't answer why I enjoyed using slip and why I chose the colors and forms that I did. So at this point, I pretty much abandoned these concepts and moved on. And this brought me to subject matter and what I really wanted to make my work look like. And this pot is where the reason for my interest in ceramics became clear. I made this pot after kind of coining the phrase frosting a pot. And that was really integral to drawing a clear connection between how I worked in ceramics and how I worked in food. This is where my personal history comes into play. My grandma used to own a restaurant in Delhi. She has taught me a lot about what I know about baking and some cooking. Growing up, when I was home alone, I used to make mini layered cakes totally from scratch, eat the whole thing, and then clean up before anybody knew it had ever happened. Most of my job experience before college was in the food industry. I worked as a line cook for a while, and sometimes I would do exposition, which is all of the steps between a cook cooking your food and a server bringing it out to you, as well as just managing the kitchen and keep it flowing smoothly. So these experiences manifested as using dessert as subject matter, and I started using some of the techniques used in food preparation to make my work, specifically the final decoration of dessert. And here are a few videos of where I started playing with food presentation in my work. I was starting to think about frosting a pot a bit more, but there wasn't a whole lot of intention behind it. I was just worried with the decoration. I started this and just thought to myself, well, this is trash. I just wasn't happy with it. It wasn't something I wanted to show to somebody. So I just kind of abandoned all seriousness and just started having fun with it. So after a time working on that same pot, I scraped off what I had, and instead of thinking about the interaction of slit and a thrown pot, I started working in a way that you would actually decorate a cake, because they are different. With a cake, you can pretty much just frost it and leave it, or put it in the fridge. But with ceramics, moisture content and what you're working with, like the humidity of the room and the drying environment are really important. If it's not the right environment, your pieces will crack or fall apart. So this method of working became impractical very quickly. I started thinking less about the interaction of a thrown form in decoration and started thinking about the decoration itself as an object. And that brought me to this. The process of piping dollops is really when my ideas started to come together, but I wasn't quite there yet. I was thinking about the environment surrounding this decoration and what setting it would be in. And that brought me to my middle development, and I was really thinking about unity, the communal experience, and immersion in your environment and the society around you. And that brings me to my next influence, Tiffany Tang. She lives in Rhode Island, and she calls her work functional, but some of it may not be, but she does have a reason for that. She focuses on creating direct relationships through her work. She intentionally uses a tabletop scale, meaning it would just sit on a table. Somebody could easily pick them up, handle them, break them with just their hands. And she uses this scale to create the urge to interact with it. Along with this, she also talks about ideas of how trauma causes a loss of sense of self and divide from the world and the society around you. And her work serves to forge new connections and start to bridge this divide. And while these ideas are somewhat relevant to my work now, I was now thinking, well, where does food come back into play? This was my main investigation. What's the significance of food? Which brings me to my next influence, Anna Barlow. She lives in London, and she works purely sculpturally. She uses porcelain and some glass. And she has a fascination with how food is assembled, displayed, and then eaten. Her main goal is to create, as she calls it, visual edibility. And when she uses this term, she means when the viewer is looking at her work, she wants them to imagine how it would taste. And this brought me back to the final stages of food preparation again. But this time around, instead of just some random pot that I'd thrown that I liked, the pots were formally inspired by dessert, such as ice cream or a layered cake. And responding to these ideas, I started dissecting my own fascination with food preparation. These ideas from Anna, combined with the persistent comment of, "I want to eat your work," made me realize my work creates this visceral or innate urge to eat. And while not everybody experienced this, I received a comment enough that I just couldn't ignore it. And this helped me realize the true importance of food presentation. But I first want to talk about my next influence. And that is Shayna Lieb. She can't actually eat dessert because she will literally die if she does because of allergies and dietary restrictions. But to her, dessert is the most powerful form of food because it represents desire. But it can also cause delight, it can cause guilt. And it's one of the first things to get cut when people start a diet. So now I was looking at how dessert affects people directly. So bouncing off of that, I realized people have powerful associations with dessert, whether they be positive or negative. And these preferences or aversions to sweets, combined with what Shayna says about how dessert can make someone feel, started to make me question the role of something like food and how it can play in our lives outside of just providing sustenance. And that brought me to my late development. I didn't start reaching any real clarity, honestly, until the beginning of April. And I started exploring philosophical ideas pertaining to the balance of self-control and indulgence, such as hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure, gratification, and repetition makes it come back from the very beginning. So hedonism is essentially a philosophy that pleasure is the most important or influential pursuit of mankind. A hedonist strives to maximize their pleasure. Some consider this philosophy the opposite of discipline. And I made this graphic to visualize the research I was doing, and it presents the balance between indulgence and self-control. The red point at the top is considered addiction or like habitually engaging in impulsive acts, while the yellow at the bottom is ridding oneself of all worldly afflictions and urges, kind of how a monk would live. The green circle, for most of us who don't conform to the ideas of hedonism and follow them strictly, it's considered the healthiest form of living. And this will help inform you a little bit more on the two types of hedonism. There is ethical and psychological. Ethical investigates, and to those who engage in it, informs how we make conscious decisions in relation to our moral obligation. An example would be like choosing to volunteer for a community service because it gives you a sense of fulfillment. And I don't consider myself a hedonist, but I just use these ideas to inform my practice. And I'm interested mainly in the second type, which is psychological hedonism. And this explains our innate instinct of self-preservation. It claims we're all motivated through pain or pleasure, pain being negative and pleasure being positive. Following this research, it can be claimed that we are all also searching for pleasure, or in other words, pursuing positive motivation. And this creates the pursuit of pleasure. Seeking this out constantly tests indulgence. We all have our own act or object we find pleasure in, and we pursue it repeatedly. And this brings repetition's role in indulgence back into play. I came to the conclusion that repetition generates indulgence, and this is not to say any repetitious act is indulgent. Going to bed the same time every night is not indulgence, that's just a healthy life. Pleasure or displeasure is where the difference lies. Committing a pleasurable act over and over, like gorging oneself bite by bite or getting drunk drink by drink, creates indulgence. The act is no longer pleasurable. There is no positive association with it anymore, and this indulgence creates instant gratification. Instant gratification is an occurrence when we engage in an act of indulgence impulsively, and this is generally considered a harmful act. My main illustration of this is piping of literally thousands of dollops. I reached indulgence or satiation at around 1,000, I would guess. I don't know the exact number. But after this, the act lost all of its significance to me. It just became a chore instead of something I enjoyed doing. my initial interest is no longer there, and my exploration of this interest was much more enriching to me than achieving understanding of why I had an initial interest. And that brings me to where I am now. And this is also about where my discoveries end and about the end of what my work can actually demonstrate. I don't foresee this thought process ending, so my future work will probably follow these ideas also. This all started with a single interest, a curiosity in the overlap of food and art. And I didn't really realize it at first, but this became the main drive of my thesis. But this curiosity has been satisfied. I am satisfied. So this picture is just a sneak peek of the show. Thrown vessels are included to show development, variety, and skill, and like I said, start to form this landscape. And the dollops are the main component of my show. I've piled them around the vessels in forms. I've even covered almost an entire wall of them. And these dollops show the sequence of curiosity, repetition, indulgence, and finally gratification. Thank you. Questions?
How do you feel about pursuing your work once your curiosity has been satiated? Like, what does that look like for you?
For me, now it was just a goal of finishing a show rather than an initial curiosity. Like I said, my curiosity was satisfied, so it kind of lost its significance to me, and now it just became about finding the ending to all the other components, like the show.
You said you also don't pursue your work changing in your future. Like, what does that feel like to you?
It might not look exactly like dessert, like this. I think food will still play a big role in it. But also in this next work, I'm thinking more about talking specifically to self-control versus indulgence, whereas this was more just on indulgence and how we reach that.
Connor, do you think that curiosity is satiated because of your understanding of the topics you've been talking about, understanding those intellectual qualities of being human? It's not a defeatist thing. It's just like, I've done the greatest purpose of art making, of understanding existence a lot more.
Yeah. I'd say it's kind of like reading a book. Like, you get into a book and then you finish it and it's done. Like, you finish a series, like there's nothing else to explore there. So, yeah, both in work and in the ideas, I've learned enough to where I've reached understanding and I'm ready to move on.
Talk a little bit about how representation and overindulgence can show up as addiction, and this opposite emphasis on discipline, and sometimes that can show up as a kind of a rehabilitation. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that's balanced throughout in your work?
Can you repeat the part about self-control again? I couldn't quite hear it.
Yeah, so when you showed us your graph that you made, that related the comparison between overindulgence and extreme discipline, and the balance that is represented as that only a life. How do you feel that that balance is played out in your work?
In my work? I guess that balance wasn't necessarily the main component of my work. Like I said, it was more about how we reach indulgence. So I was focusing more on the higher end of that scale, more towards addiction, where you just keep going and going and going and going. Yeah. Did that answer that a little bit?
So you say that your curiosity is satisfied, and so I'm assuming that means you no longer intend to pursue this concept and you're ready to move on to something else. I'm curious if you think there's a point, once your curiosity has been satisfied, where you should still continue developing something, or if once you're satisfied that you should just move on completely.
So, like I've said, my work was more about like the pursuit of indulgence and how we reach that. So, and I also said my next work might explore how self-control versus indulgence works. So my curiosity with the sequence of indulgence is satisfied, but yet finding that balance in the comparison of self-control and indulgence hasn't. Like I still have questions there and what all that means. So I would focus less on the pursuit and more on the balance. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sydney?
Early on, you kind of mentioned trauma playing a little bit of a part in this, and could you go more into that? I'd like to understand that.
Yeah. So that's something that Tiffany Tang had. She grew up in an abusive home, so she has a lot of trauma from that. And I don't want to like diminish that or compare myself to that. But we do all probably experience something in our lives that we could perceive as trauma or comes back up as trauma. And that goes back to the communal experiences I was talking about and how viewing my work like in a gallery setting, like in the reception, it's creating this huge communal experience in which I will be interacting with you and forging new bonds to kind of move on from that trauma, if that makes sense. It's kind of like a breakup. You move on by meeting new people.
You talked a lot about form and space and surface, but you haven't addressed the color you use. Is that significant in the work?
The color mostly lends itself to the subject matter. Let me see if I can find the picture. So like these two pink pots reference ice cream. They did make it into the show. And it's like in a adult cone and then a baby cone that you get at an ice cream shop for like a mother and their daughter. So the base color is more to represent the cone, while the top is more to represent the color of ice cream. So it's a little bit more literal than conceptual.
And we'll break for about 7 minutes, have a quick intermission. To resume our lectures for today with Jordan and Ismaiel.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to say it again, just like everyone else. Thank y'all so much for being here for the second portion of our thesis lectures. We'll go ahead and get started. So, right now will never be enough. We'll talk more about how this plays into a lot of the work that I've been doing throughout this year and a lot of the practices that I'm really involved in. Today I'll be addressing my thesis work in painting practice by giving a brief overview of contemporary art making, queer figurative painting, and some theories in art which have shaped a lot of my direction in my work. First, we'll look at some of the concepts in painting and queer figurative painting over time. Next, we'll examine how ethical practices have shaped contemporary art making. And then finally, I'll connect these influences to my current practice and work, talking more specifically about how these communal queer processes have led me to examine protection and queer futurity, creating self-portraits and composite images in order to construct utopian environments. I want to introduce a really critical theory in painting which aids in understanding a lot of the work that I do in the studio. Looking at an article from Ismaiel, a writer and art history and theory professor, identifies painting as having the ability to be a container for one's lived experiences, saying that the labor and lifetime of the painter are seemingly stored in it. She goes on to say that this seemingly stored experience within painting is more so about the experiences that we have with painting and not necessarily about the physical surface. In this way, we might be able to think about painting as some sort of journal or diary, something that contains the experiences which we hold within it. Connecting Grau's notions of painting being a container for experience, we can see this in action through looking at queer figuration over time. Queer figuration can be seen as a genre of figurative art, emphasizing on LGBTQIA+ or queer identities and its role in the practices of the artist. Looking at the following artists, we'll examine within this genre what we'll be able to see will be clear themes of environment, identity, intimacy, partnerships, and overall relationships. First off, Frida Kahlo. Kahlo sets precedents for what figurative painting had the ability to do during their time, understanding the self-portrait and painting as not simply an image, but a site for investigation. In their practice, Kahlo addressed personal relationships, social status, and their positions within that, and complex understandings of gender and sexuality. We can look closely at the environments of these paintings as significant places for these conversations to exist, where Kahlo is able to articulate their thoughts about society and their self within their time and place. Alice Neel. In Neel's practice, we focus on not her, but who she painted and why. She considered individuals in her everyday life to be the most important subject, focusing clearly on their poses and interactions. We can see that between these two paintings up here. In these works, we see that Neel expanded on the representation of individuals within painting, individuals who historically have not been represented either by them being the artist or them being the sitter. Not exploiting them, but giving queer individuals an image within painting. Historically, if they were represented, they were often exploited. Doran Langberg. Langberg's paintings are often composed of intimate scenes between individuals, these individuals being close friends and acquaintances. His practice shows the complexity of queer-defined spaces through invoking environment with color, stroke, and varying applications of painting. We see in his own life experiences connecting to a larger conversation in queer figuration, depicting the closeness of people within his own life that have come to build communal ties. Solomon Tor. Tor's practice often features groups of individuals in specific spaces related to their personal life. Bars, friends' apartments, clubs, spaces which are created for queer individuals that have been manifested to openly be themselves and express their sexuality, gender, and identity. These works are connected to the painter's identity and personal narrative, often pulling from direct personal experiences. Images are constructed from composite images, multiple images coming together to make one final image. These images are rendered in such a way which expresses the effeminate nature of the many individuals presented within each of these paintings. A lot of their work is based upon Renaissance and Baroque paintings made around the 15 to 1700s in Europe, featuring groups of individuals interacting with each other, but often focusing on one particular interaction within each of these paintings. Anthony Cudday. Cudday constructs paintings from queer archives and personal photos, as well as narrative visual elements in order to address moments of lamenting. Overall specific points in time or events which come from these archives and photos are a lot of the interests that he takes a part in. His practice often features his partner, Ian, seen in both of these paintings, but an examination of the love and care for both their personal life and communal and narrative histories are also present within his works. Alongside queer figurative practices, ethical ways of making and doing emerged as an important role in contemporary art making. Looking at the following artists, we'll be able to see them with the themes of how care and how people are used as subjects in art, and the artists taking on the responsibility of their practice becoming representative of communities. We'll also be able to make connections between these practices and larger social issues which have become politicized because of the desire to maintain power over minority communities by those in privileged positions. We can see all these elements in Tamashi Jackson's practice, seeing how really formal qualities in art such as color and line are used to create images surrounding issues of property seizure from Black and brown communities, both historically and currently. Their work utilizes Joseph Alber's theories on color and action. Screen printing found images on various materials which use color combinations that cause images to recede into the backgrounds. We can see that most clearly with this image on the left, how the images collapse into the color of the background. Jackson's work with ethics as part of their palette of materials is seen in their use of social issues being the forefront of their paintings, taking on this position of research and care. El Perez. El Perez's work, like many of the other queer figurative artists we've covered, features images of their friends, partners, and family, as well as moments in their personal life. In these photographs, we are almost invited into these really intimate and personal moments, which are often not accessible to those outside of these individuals' narratives. Perez allows us a glimpse into these acts, considering how they depict individuals. Their work, rather than exploiting these individuals, becomes a space for sincere appreciation and feeling. Jennifer Packer. Packer's painting practice most clearly centers ethics, thinking about the ways of painting the sitter in their works as an act of protecting them and concealing their identities. These sitters are the friends and partners of Packer, who she has come to know closely. The space these people are painted in are often in connection to the environment. Packer's work reconfigures traditional figure painting, focusing on the representation of Black people within painting, which has historically been not represented. Their practice also includes multiple paintings of funerary bouquets, flowers offered to Black people in times of loss, more specifically Black women who have been subject to police brutality. While these paintings are about loss, they've come to show the power of what offering flowers means, that we care about and love these individuals when we give them flowers. After breaking down the themes of queer figuration and ethical practices in art, I want to show how they have played an important role in shaping my own practice. We'll see how these concerns for the individual as subject and notions about partnership have come together in two main parts, showing how I go about constructing images and then how I approach the act of painting them. I started out by looking at queer photo archives from the center in New York City, both showing the anniversary of the Stonewall riots in 1969, which is largely the start of the gay civil rights movement. These photos don't capture the reality of this time, not showing the black and brown trans women responsible for starting this movement, which ultimately causes us to focus on the cisgender white men within these photos. Amongst these photos, I started to see a lot of patterns that emerged. These patterns dealing with people embracing one another, often in public spaces, something that was really radical for the time, for two men to simply be hugging each other. I also started to look at, my mom's laughing. I also started to look at family photos, and I started picking up a lot of the same things that I was seeing in these queer photo archives in the photos of my family. And so these two images that I'm showing up here are both photos that I use to inform compositions that you'll be able to see in later paintings. Looking at these photo references, I started to create photo references in order to fully realize the images I wanted to make. A lot of the images that I was dealing with were multiple people interacting with each other. And often I have felt within my life that there hasn't been anyone else to lean on. And while I do have my family and I do have my friends, there is a part that feels like it's never enough. And I wanted to make images where I could fully realize how I was supporting myself in a lot of times where I felt like I couldn't talk to anyone else. And I couldn't express a lot of the things that I was feeling because I didn't know what those things meant. I centered around creating these images of interactions between myself that were based upon a lot of these photo references, depicting embrace, multiple people protecting each other, shielding. I started experimenting with a lot of replication in interactions between myself that could be seen as some sort of shielding in moments of really intimate forms of embrace. When I started working on these, I wasn't considering the environment too much. And as I was going further into my investigations of these photo references, environment became a really important factor. And like a lot of the queer figurative artists that we saw, we see that environment plays a really important part into their practices. And I wanted to understand what that fully meant, to be creating an environment where physically I didn't feel as though I fit into, and what an environment could be. As I got further along, I started thinking about how I could expand upon space and how I could transform a small constrained surface into something that I could immerse myself into and expand upon and world build. I started to think about these digital photo composites in connection to Legacy Russell's text, Glitch Feminism. Russell proposes that the digital realm in its many possibilities allows individuals to circumnavigate systems of oppression through the digital body alteration. Through building the online avatar or building an online identity, we're able to redefine gender, sex, identity in the body. This process allows us to examine existing systems of oppression that take place in real life, which often have penetrated digital systems that we've created online. Russell uses the word glitch in order to address minority identities that have been victims to these systems, and says that one should not embrace this inability to function but should rather play to its strengths. That understanding that the system was not designed for everyone in the first place. The system is designed in order to expose glitches, to expose minority identities, and to attempt to eradicate them. And a lot of the work that I'm influenced by, and a lot of the work that I want to create, emphasizes on these glitches, myself being a glitch, and those who I'm in connection with being glitches, and how, rather than being eradicated, they provide a world of their own. The digital processes that I'm using in my practice are in order to redefine the abilities of the body, showing myself being able to provide for myself in real time. These references that I made started to inform the paintings that I was making within the studio. While making these paintings, I was allowing myself to make decisions on the canvas in a lot of the same ways that I was making decisions in Photoshop. I am not an expert in graphic design, so a lot of these photo references that I made were really crude and were only to give me the ability to make a composition and to make base color interactions. By making these paintings, I was able to make really critical edits that I needed to in order to make a united, harmonious image on the surface. Going through that process, I also understood a lot of the replication practices that I was working with in the digital realm and incorporating those into the realm of painting, which in a lot of ways became really synonymous. Going further, I started to think a lot about how environment became a really key part into the work that I was doing. But at some points, these works felt really constrained, and I wasn't able to explore the things that I needed to. Going further on exploring this environment, I was, this painting on the right, going back to that family photo that I showed earlier, that photo became the compositional base for this painting. And what I wanted to do with these paintings is visualize utopia in some sort of way. This really effeminate environment where self-made protection can be possible, these moments of me shielding myself and holding myself, that ultimately has the potential to exist. I feel that painting makes this world possible, a lot of the ways that the digital realm makes Legacy Russell's life possible. And for these kinds of interactions to exist, I needed to rely on painting and the functions of painting and what painting had the ability to do for me. Things that I wanted my paintings to do directly relate to Jose Esteban Muñoz's Cruising Utopia. In this text, he explains this theory of queer futurity, which in short addresses how the future is a place where queer people are not subject to oppression. Through my practice, invoking a personal but also communal visual representation of futurity, the future that is defined within this text is never fully explained and never fully visualized. And because of that, the future is always undefined and these environments are always undefined. And that is something that I wanted to pull into my practice. And so going through making these environments, a lot of them are washes of color, flowers dispersed throughout the scene, and they're really ambiguous. And they're ambiguous for the reason that the future is something that we're always approaching. We will never exist in the future. We only exist in the present. And so every time we think about the future and we think about ourselves, it's always something that we're reaching towards. And when we reach that goal, you'll have another future that you're looking towards. And so it's something that you're always approaching and approaching and approaching. Nothing will ever be good enough for that time that you're in because you'll always be wanting something more. And that's how I found a lot of the practices within my paintings going. And so these ambiguous environments, these landscapes, have the ability to mold over time and become what I need them to be in that moment. I want to end by talking about this triptych that I made. And it shows a lot of the processes that I think about in becoming, in realizing, and then leaving. I really thought about this work that I was making as entering this conversation that artists were having, and I wanted to have those same conversations. And so the painters that we looked at are people who I'm really critically influenced by. I absorb painting on a daily basis. My Instagram feed is full of it, and I don't want to stop looking at it. And because of that, I become really invested in a lot of the conversations that these individuals are having. And so I wanted to understand what becoming meant, and by that, what I needed to do in order to enter these conversations, and what things could I add to them. Realizing that in the midst of these conversations, there were things that were not addressed. All of the painters that we looked at were people who were painting people that they're really close to, people in their lives. And that's something that I haven't had yet. And that's something that I really asked a question of, and what I wanted that to look like, because I didn't have those same kind of experiences. And so I was able to bring a new conversation to the table within all of these things happening. And so what does it look like for a person to be in the rural Midwest? And when they rely on themselves, what does that look like? And by leaving, I'm able to leave all the things that weren't possible for me, and everything that works against me in the world, and the things that work against a lot of queer people of color in the world. And by leaving this system, I'm able to build a new world, and really think about that within these paintings. In reality, we can't just build something from scratch and have that be the perfect thing. And I want that to be possible, and it's possible through these paintings and through the work that I make in the studio. But in reality, what these paintings do is protect me in a lot of ways. A lot of the ways that I wasn't able to myself. I want to end off by addressing what I want people to take away from the experiences of looking at these paintings. And that's, there's so many undefined things about this stuff that I talk about, and sometimes I confuse myself. But what I think is most important is that people take away feeling from this, and that by walking into the space and by seeing something, this experience becomes possible for you too. And that at the end of the day, if you're left with feeling, that's all that matters. I also want to end off by thanking some really important people in my life. Lamoree, who was a student here, really helped me through this process and just through my overall studio practice. Cheyenne Hands as well really helped me through this process in my studio practice. People who I've relied on. Dr. Eleanor Reeds, who I could go to at any moment and ask questions and just chat about the things that I'm really interested in. And Dr. Allison Keeler, for the same reasons. The most two important people who aren't able to be here today in person are Kevin Mercer and Sarah Swiss. And they helped me make things possible and gave me the chance that I needed. So thank you. I'm done, so y'all can ask questions now.
Can you talk a little bit more about why you decided to use repetitions of yourselves in painting?
So the main reason why I decided to use this like repeating image of myself was because I was looking at a lot of these photos, and there were always like multiple people hugging each other, embracing each other, and being in this environment where they all feel safe. They are within this moment of like just being with each other and being in a really communal space. And a lot of the experiences in my life haven't allowed for that. And what I wanted to do was recreate those same experiences for myself. And by not having other individuals being able to experience that with, a lot of it I leaned on to myself. And so I wanted to think about a way that I could make those same interactions happen, interactions where people are able to protect each other, but seeing how I protect myself in a lot of situations, or like the ways that I fail to do that, because it doesn't happen all the time, and sometimes I have to hold my breath, and sometimes I let things pass. And so a lot of the replicated images that I was making were attempting to recreate this way of seeing how protection could be possible when you're doing it by yourself.
So you talk a lot about creating spaces and creating spaces for queer people to exist. Can you talk about how that works in a 2D format? Because obviously you're a 2D artist, you're a painter. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So what Sydney is referencing is that when we talk a lot about space and environment, it usually takes place in this three-dimensional format. And so what happens when a painter comes in is like, I'm really interested in space, right? So the ways that I see that happening is creating this landscape that's really ambiguous, and is invoked by a lot of the like color applications that I use and a lot of the paint applications that I use. But the space is not this physical space. It's something that we're projecting. And what I mean by that is when we talk about it, when we have these conversations about the space that we want to create, we're creating that in real time, even though we can't fully enter it. By talking about it, we're creating it. And so the spaces that I'm talking about are not fully realized, and it's not something that we can like tangibly enter, but because there are conversations about it, it exists in some way.
Jordan, following on from that, because when I think about the space you create with your work, especially in the gallery right now, then what role does the gaze play? Because the eye contact of your work is making with the viewer is really powerful. Does that play some role in your idea of creating space? And if so, how?
So Brian is referencing the eye contact that I maintain, or the paintings maintain with the viewer. So in a lot of the paintings that I showed within this presentation, I am making direct eye contact and I'm never looking away. And so walking into the space with those paintings present causes this reversal of the gaze. And when we talk about that, what we usually talk about is the viewer interacting with the work and looking at the work. But there is kind of a role reversal that happens with these paintings because they're making direct eye contact back. And because of that, that experience is really confrontational, which is also something that I wanted to be present within the work. A lot of the time, I felt that the eye contact that I had on me was really confrontational. And so I feel as though every time I walk somewhere, there's always something in question. I never wake up and like go a day without having something be questioned or something being arbitrated over, someone having an opinion. And what these paintings do is create that same experience. And that's not something that I hope that people have, but something that is just present within the work because of the way the situation works out.
Is there significance to your portrayal of yourself with and then also without glasses on?
Yeah. So earlier this year, I was trying to think of really direct ways to paint multiples of myself. And I started off by painting within the same works, a version of myself with glasses and a version of myself without. And a lot of that had to do with like the ability to see what was really there, to see what was actually happening versus what we perceive things to be. And I felt that that was really literal and something that I kind of left behind. And so a lot of the earlier paintings that I have will have multiple depictions of myself without glasses and with glasses. In later works that I made during this year, I just painted myself without glasses. And what I wanted that to be was two things. One, to help build this sense of confrontation and this ability to erase something that creates a veil. And so when I take off my glasses, it's a totally different experience, and that direct eye contact becomes more intense. Versus with my glasses, there's something that cuts off that line, I feel. And that's also something that I'm still exploring, and so it's not fully realized yet.
Got you. We got time for one more.
With the LGBTQIA+ community being such a strong and unique social dynamic of current events, how did that form what you put into your work?
And so what does that same conversation look like when it's me in rural Nebraska? And I feel like a lot of the time I'm the only one here just like chilling. And so what I hope process, just like throughout my entire life being here, I'd like
Thank you all for sticking around for this long. My name is McKenna Lamoree, and this have covered topics such as the objectification of women, body image, and mental disorders such as anxiety and depression. Not saying that these topics are unimportant or that I regret doing them, but for my senior thesis, I just wanted to do something different than what I had done in the past. In layman's terms, I wanted to have fun with it. I wanted to celebrate my college experience, and I thought the best way to do so was to shine a light on the people who made it enjoyable for me. The concept behind my thesis is to take photographs that showcase 5 important people who have helped me grow artistically and spiritually throughout my 4 years here at Hastings College. After contemplating how to display these people in the truest way possible, I decided to highlight not only the physical aspects, but the metaphysical aspects of their personalities. By projecting light through specialized gel modifiers, I'm able to create environments that reflect each individual's auras. Specific colors are associable with different personality traits. Therefore, each individual has their own unique combination of colors in their portraits. All right, so what is an aura? According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the definition of aura reads, an energy field that is held to emanate from a living being. In order to fully give insight on what an aura is, I must first describe the history behind the term and the effects it has had on society. All living creatures are made up of tiny electrical impulses that aid in the creation of electromagnetic fields surrounding them. These electromagnetic fields are what are known as auras. The content behind these auras is said to be represented by different colors. Each color has a different meaning and is able to illustrate one's emotional state, personality, and spirituality. The history of auras can be traced as far back as prehistoric cave paintings, and they have even been depicted in historical artworks of spiritual figures such as Christ and Buddha. An example of this can be seen within a multitude of paintings by artist Heinrich Hoffmann. One in particular that stands out would be the portrait I have shown up here, which is titled Christ in Gethsemane. In the portrait, Jesus Christ is seen staring up in the heavens with a yellow glow surrounding his head. Hoffman's purpose for doing this is to represent Christ's holy aura. Not only have these electromagnetic fields been represented throughout art history, but they have also been scientifically studied as well. A quote from an article titled "The Scientific Evidence of Human Aura" by Dr. Nadi Sahu states, "The human body consists of energy vibrating at specific rates. The vibrational energy produces a magnetic field around the body. All our bodily processes, such as respiration, digestion, nervous, circulatory, and etc., comprise of a series of electrochemical reactions. These magnetic and electrical energy fields interact to form what is known as an aura. It surrounds about 4 to 5 feet of an area around the human body. This aura interacts with environmental factors to create an energy balance in our body, which is so essential for its normal functioning." I now want to address a very inspirational artistic movement that centers around the portrayal of auras. This is known as aura photography. Aura photography is able to record and display this electromagnetic energy that is emitted from one's body in order to create a very colorful portrait. The equipment that I have shown up here includes the aura camera and 2 hand sensor plates. In order to achieve an aura portrait, one must place their hands on these sensors that are connected to the camera. The sensors then collect the electrical output from your hands and then transfer it to the camera, which then produces a unique algorithm of colors. An example of this can be seen up here. This is Colorful You by Charlie Watts. This is an example of aura photography. With my method of creating auras in photographs, I do not use the equipment that has been previously stated. One, because I do not have thousands of dollars to spend on this camera, and 2, because I didn't want to just copy a concept that had already been done. So instead, I set up 2 lights with gel modifiers in order to project these colors onto each of my models to create their auras. By doing so, I am able to produce my own unique version of aura photographs. These photographs are able to capture what I believe each model's aura colors are and shine light on their character. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about my method of production with this. I use my own knowledge of the personality traits of my models in order to decide what colors match their auras best. After spending an immense amount of time with my models over the past 4 years, I have come to know them on a more personal level. Because of this, I felt confident in my ability of choosing their colors, obviously along with their outfit. I also had my models choose outfits and accessories that they felt showed their personalities and made them feel very confident and comfortable. The posing in these photos is very lax and candid. By doing this, it provides less stress on the model and better represents their personalities, instead of just putting together a stage production. All right, and now I kind of want to go in and talk about the influences that were very crucial in the development of my thesis. First up would be Amy Leibovitz. Amy Leibovitz is a portrait photographer known best for her very alluring photographs that depict subjects in intimate poses and settings. A quote by Chief Curator Eva Rospini of the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston reads, "Because of Amy's own power, she is able to get her subjects to reveal something of themselves, subjects that I would imagine are usually pretty guarded." This quote gives perfect insight on why Leibovitz is influential in the process of developing my thesis. Leibovitz puts a great effort into creating photographs that display how her subjects see themselves. She wants to be able to show a sense of realities in her photos. She achieves this by creating photographs that contain settings, costumes, and poses that all relate directly back to the models and their personalities. Examples of this can be seen with the two portraits I have up on the board here. The first one being of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. As you can see, this is a very intimate shot. And then also we have a portrait of Meryl Streep. And I want to give a little bit of insight on this portrait of Meryl Streep really quick. In her book, At Work, Leibovitz describes the process of taking Streep's portrait as somewhat very difficult in the beginning. At the time, Meryl was very new in the acting world and was not yet super comfortable with the amount of attention she had been receiving. Because of this, she had canceled multiple appointments with Leibovitz to have her photographs taken. Eventually, Leibovitz did convince her to attend a short session. When she came to the session, she had voiced concerns to Leibovitz about not feeling 100% comfortable with having her photograph taken. She had told Leibovitz that she did not want to be anybody. She was just a nobody who happened to be an actress. After hearing her concerns, Leibovitz came up with the idea of putting white paint on Meryl's face and sort of just having her play a part. She could be a mime and she didn't have to be herself. By doing this, she really took Streep's feelings into account and tried her best to make her comfortable while having her portrait taken. Like Leibovitz did with Meryl, I wanted to take my model's preferences regarding the setup of the photography into account. When it comes to showing their personalities within these photographs, they're the only ones who can truly do that, so it's very important to have their input. My next influence that I'd like to talk about is philosopher and clairvoyant Edgar Cayce. I've always been fascinated in the philosophy behind auras, but it wasn't until after examining the writings of Edgar Cayce that I wanted to find a way to display them in my art. This would be the perfect opportunity to focus on auras and the philosophies that Cayce preaches. In his writing titled Auras, an essay on the meaning of colors, Cayce discusses how he is able to physically see and understand the auras of those around him. He states that he is able to tell a good deal from the intensity of the colors, their distribution, and the positions that they occupy. Cayce believes the mind, or as he would put it, the builder of the soul, is an essential governing factor in the aura, but food, environment, and other conditions also have their effects on aura as well. Cayce also preaches that one can be struggling with physical, mental, or nervous disorders. By analyzing these auras, imbalances can be discovered and then treated properly. One main point that Cayce makes that I drew a very large amount of inspiration from was that even if one cannot physically see auras, they can still sense auras by... A quote from Cayce that better explains this reads, "How many times have you said how beautiful she looks in that dress? She was made to wear it. She was wearing a color that harmonized with her aura. All of you know what colors are helpful to your friends and bring out the best in them. They are the colors that beat with the same vibrations as the aura and thus truly match their personalities." Cayce's take on auras and how he interprets of my models, I then decided to display these for others who are also not able to see auras with the naked eye. Terry Wrights is an artistic influence that holds a very special place in my heart. Not only is he the man who introduced me to photography, but he's also my grandfather. This is a fun little picture of us playing some checkers. You guys enjoy there. For as long as I can remember, my grandfather has supported and pushed me in my quest to validate myself as a photographer. Ever since I was old enough to hold a camera, he would give me one of his old Nikons, and we would drive down country roads and out by the river near his hometown of Sutherland, Nebraska. It's safe to say that back then my artistic eye was not as well formed as it is today, but my grandfather would always commend me for seeing the beauty in the mundane and trying my hardest to keep up with his skill set. The unwavering amount of support and encouragement my grandfather has given me throughout the years is one of the main reasons I have continued to pursue a career in photography. I would say it's safe to say that I probably would not be standing in front of all of you today without his influence, and I'm very, very thankful for that. Now it's time to get into the fun part where I give you a little insight on my models and the aura colors and why I chose them. First up, we have Olivia. Very sorry for that. Okay, for Olivia, I chose purple and yellow. Drive and are very empathetic. Those with yellow in their aura are said to be very confident, very supportive, and a strong sense of self, and are very generous. To be completely honest, I was when I first met Olivia, I was very intimidated by her. Not because she was mean or seemed unapproachable, but because she was so authentically herself. Like those with yellow in their aura, Olivia's confidence in herself and in her art radiates within and around her. When with her, I feel super comfortable being myself because of her unconditional acceptance. That is something I have the utmost gratitude for and always will. Her talent and self-esteem have pushed me to grow as an artist and continue to grow assurance in myself. Her purple aura allows her to be constantly original and true to herself no matter the circumstance. This is a trait I genuinely admire and one day hope to accumulate. Next up we have Emma. For Emma's colors, I chose green and magenta. Those with green in their aura radiate unconditional love. They are very drawn to nature, very spiritual, very peaceful. Those with magenta in their auras are said to be true originals, very intuitive, very optimistic in personality to anyone she meets, and this is definitely what drew me to her. No matter what my emotional state may be, I know spending time with Emma will help me let go and enjoy the moment. Her capability of working hard to obtain her goals and still being there for others in times of need is truly awe-inspiring. No matter the circumstance, the green in Emma's aura causes her to provide unconditional love and healing for me and others around her. Next up we have Jordan. For Jordan, I chose the colors yellow and blue. Those with yellow in their auras are said to be very inspirational, generous, have a strong sense of self. Those with blue in their auras are said to be very knowledgeable, reliable, honest, and are avid dreamers. I strongly believe that I would not have been able to handle Thesis without Jordan's help. They have helped me more than I could ever thank them for. Like many with a blue aura, Jordan is full of wisdom that they are more than willing to share with others. Many panic attacks and times of self-doubt were prevented because of their help. They are one of the most kind-hearted and generous people I have had the pleasure of coming into contact with. Genuinely a ray of light. The article I researched by the Aura Photography Company to find the definitions of these aura colors has a quote for the yellow aura that reads, "Those who glow yellow naturally attract others towards them. They are warm and radiant like the sun." I feel like this quote gives perfect insight on how Jordan truly is. Next up we have Riley. For Riley, I chose orange and pink as her aura colors. Those with orange in their auras are very joyful, very relatable, and understanding. They are also very thrill-seeking. Those with pink in their auras are gentle, sensitive, loving, and very bubbly. Okay, so Riley is my cousin, so I have known her my whole life, but it wasn't until we started going to college in the same town that we became extremely close. To put it simply, I view Riley as my other half. Like many with pink in their aura, Riley possesses such a gentle and caring soul. Because of this, I know I'm able to trust and depend on her no matter the situation. I'm able to open up and be my true self around her because I know the understanding and acceptance she has for everyone she comes into contact with. Like those with orange in their auras, Riley radiates joy wherever she goes. Because of this, it is very easy for one to enjoy the environment when she is present. Any adventure I come up with, I know that she'll always be there for me, there with me to provide light and thrill along the way. Last but not least, we have Bailey. For Bailey, I chose the colors red and turquoise for her auras. Those with red in their auras are very driven, passionate, fearless, and very restless. Those with turquoise in their auras are said to be very compassionate, communicative, very natural healers, and very organized. One of the best ways I could probably describe Bailey would be as a firecracker. She is one of the strongest people I know. Like those with red in their auras, once she sets her mind to something, her powerful determination and stubbornness kicks in, and she will not stop until she succeeds her goals. Being around her pushes me to do the same thing, and I am extremely grateful for that. Bailey is someone I can always count on to listen to any issues I may have and assure me that my feelings are completely validated. Like others with turquoise in their auras, Bailey is able to stay organized and dedicated with whatever she pursues in life, and I find that truly inspiring. I forgot to switch the slide, but there you guys go. All right, in conclusion, I believe that the art I made for my thesis is very important because it encourages one to go beyond the physical traits of a person and get to know them based on the soul inside. Right here, this is what's in JDAC, but this picture does not do it justice, so you should come to the reception afterwards. I'm done. Right. You can ask some questions if you want now. Yes.
So, the point of this was like to capture the essence, the aura is the word you used, of all the people in the photographs. So I'm curious how you came up with the poses. Did you decide that? Did you let each model choose their own?
Actually, it was definitely what I would say, like, let me just give you a little bit of insight like on how the shoots went. I would basically just play music and I would tell them like, dance around, have a good time with it. I want these to be completely like authentic to you and your personality. So I don't want to try to stage you very much because if I did, it wouldn't be really representing who you actually are. Oh, yes, hi.
So it came to mind while I was looking at the final slide that the composition of color, though there are similarities and some of your models share similar colors, did your background as a photographer and in any classes you've taken on campus where you've learned about color theory and other such, did that influence the colors that you picked for your models besides the fact that you believe that those colors represented them?
Okay, I would say yes and no. For deciding the colors of the auras for my models, I didn't really take into account like color theory and everything because I wanted it to like obviously represent what I envisioned the auras to be. But I can't even go back. But like when setting it up, I definitely tried not to put together like the two groups that had yellow in it or the two groups that had blue and turquoise in it. So I guess you could say for that, I tried to take it more into account, but yeah. Cool. Yes?
How did you decide on using two colors for the auras?
Basically what I did, when I was researching aura photography, when that camera takes pictures, like the energy it collects, multiple colors are displayed, so I would say that probably influenced me to choose more than just one color. And obviously it looks cooler, so yeah. Yes?
Throughout this process, did you ever consider analyzing your own aura? And if so, what colors do you consider to be?
I did actually. I did put some thought into it, and I would probably say that red and green match my aura the best. I look pretty good in red, so that was like one reason I chose that. But yeah. So yes. And green has just always been my favorite color, so I'll just make it my aura. Yes.
Do you feel those colors represent your personality as well?
I would say so, yeah. Like I mentioned previously, like people with red in their auras are very stubborn, and my mom just asked this question, so she could probably agree that I can be very stubborn. And people with green tend to be very spiritual, very drawn to nature, and I would like to consider myself having those qualities, so yeah.
Last call. Thank you all for joining us for these lectures. Reminder, please join us over in the Jackson Dinsdale Art Center for a reception and to have further conversation with the artists and to view their work.